Congratulations, you missed mission statements. That's how this fucking recording is starting. Okay. We already talked about mission statements. We're not doing that again. It took like 5 minutes. Memlo and I are going to work on it down the road once we have a better idea of structure so that we can flesh out the this is accomplished through section. Funny enough, this works out really well for summarizing for Moose. So, we have some stuff posted in the chat. Memlo and I will draft documents and stuff and fork from there when we get around to it. In the meantime, the big reason I'm sure everyone is here is structure.
I'll just here for the mission statement.
You want us to agree for that? Like, yes!
Yeah, everybody get excited.
Yep.
Let's talk about organizational structure.
Woo!
Okay, so we had 5 presented, and I know that Snipe was actually really... Snipe, I don't know if you want to lurk on this or actually put input. I don't remember if I'm pretty sure you clarified on that.
No, not for this one. I'll wait.
Okay. So we have a few structures laid out, and personally, I want to try and like peg those down to like 3 so that it's manageable, and so that we have like a good way to move forward. Because if we're trying to like flesh out more than 3, that's going to be insanely difficult. And fleshing out 3 already is difficult. We're probably going to end up narrowing that down to 2 sometime later next week, as we find more flaws and different things that we don't really want to be in the league as an organizational impact or some kind of security issue, etc. As a reminder, the 5 ideas are e-board, similar to CCA. Shamu's 5 admin idea, where there are 5 admins that kind of counsel and lead the league, and then they help pick up other committees underneath them, but don't directly function in the committees and oversee them. His doesn't have a commissioner. That there's my 5 admin idea that does have a commissioner and does have the owner doing something, but not involved as a commissioner, an admin, or anything else. Maybe a committee member if they decide to, but nothing more than that. And then there's CD's idea, which is technically our current structure, but I don't think anyone is very pleased with that, since it's not very streamlined. And then keeping the JCs, which is our old structure. And not sure how people really feel about that. I know that there's some people who are like, that's functional, and others who are like, that didn't really work out for a lot of reasons. But if we did revert to that, there would be refinements on top of it. The base structure would be the same. The execution of it would be different. I actually have not thought of a way to decide on which 3 we move forward with other than just discussion.
I mean, I could throw out my input if it's
the
next step in the process. I mean, I'm honestly not against CD's idea. I was against how it happened, and I think that a owner that doesn't have a huge stake but can kind of make sure that the overall league is moving in the right direction, a commissioner that does have a huge stake and has fingers in all the pies, and then people that report up to him is actually great. My fear, though, is that it doesn't really accomplish what we were trying to create here as a league. And so if people are very happy with that, I am more than happy to move forward with it. I would just be fearful that just a few people could have so much power. And therefore, that's why I think I like Spoopy's and Shamu's idea, probably the next best. And I'm kind of a firm believer that the JCs needed a huge revamp if they were going to stay the way they were. And really defining what their abilities are and make sure that that writing is kind of crystal clear and everybody understands this is how we're moving forward, and that it's written down, because as it changed hands, that's when confusion set in, and that's where a lot of things that were said in voice chats were lost because they were never tracked. So I'm a big fan of, because of that, Spoopies and the e-board idea probably first. If we do decide to go with e-board, I would like to get a little bit more conversation with CCA people, maybe MLD people, just to make sure that we understand, or even people that have been in frats. Like I've never been in a frat, so I don't have a good way of weighing in on how things like that can be run.
It's pretty different. I don't think you could translate it over because it's just like president, vice president, secretary, treasurer.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, I mean, Treasury might make sense even in a league like this if we decided to get sponsors or money involved or something like that. I don't know.
Mhm.
And then, so Spoopies, e-board, and then honestly, if people really like it, CDs. I think the JC's probably run its course, and we just need to get away from it. Even though I was on the JC, and I felt like I thought I was making change.
That's the way life is run. Anyone else have any other commentary?
I think if we were to move forward with option 2 or 3, I think it would be greatest, like, looking in, like, with it, as far as more conversation goes between the two about the idea of a commissioner. I think that's like the biggest conversation that needs to happen between those two, and like a pros con between like the powers of a commissioner. And I think that ties into what Memlo was saying about like how big of a stake do they have in the league, and like should there be a check and balance to that? Is that something that the commissioners would share? Like how that ties in, I think is the biggest point of conversation. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just totally agree with the JAC. It completely needs to be revamped if it's to continue on. I think it's kind of done what it can.
That's another person player committee. Melted. Did you feel coming out of the player committee thinking JC might just need a revamp or abolished? Oh, okay.
Sorry, I was muted. Looking at these other ones, I definitely like them more than the joint committee.
Yeah.
Like, it took too long to do things. It wasn't as agile
Yeah.
as this league really does need.
It was very legalese.
What?
Legalese. Very litigious. Very much like law.
Okay.
Not like a community working together, but like a place where people are trying to write things to make a society function.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly ideal.
Is that something that we think that we can move forward with then? Most people seem to be in agreement that JC... I mean, most people in this conversation, at least, agree that JC is probably not the right play here. And I agree with Superfast. Like, can we maybe get a pros and cons of 2 and 3?
Yeah. I was just thinking that we can, like right now. I mean, we can do that right now. But if we also merge those to some degree, and then break it from there. Do you want pros and cons right now? I'm looking for a yes or a no from somebody.
I think we're at that point of the discussion. I think we've kind of spent enough time on mission statement, and we have a kind of a direction where we're planning on going there. We kind of know what we want to do with core values. I think we're in the structure, and To move forward on any of these, we either need some people from CCA to talk about eBoard and what works and what doesn't, or we just need a pro and con yours and Shamu's idea. Shamu not being here makes it a little bit difficult. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe anybody else want to weigh in on whether or not CD's structure, even it's all written up. Like a lot of the thought has already gone into it. It's not a bad idea.
It just falls into the person you put in that position for CD's idea, and this is my huge issue with it. The persons put into those positions actually need to understand how to be leaders first and foremost, because if we don't get that, there's going to be some serious fuck ups in this league like we've seen in the last 2 seasons. And then the second big issue is that they need to be open to criticism, and having like one or two people who take the brunt of that criticism as opposed to a council is a lot more strained, in my opinion. And then like my third big concern is what the league has concern with is just the too much agency over what actually happens in the league in a small number of hands, which can ultimately hurt diversity in terms of like input and staff and so on.
Sure, you get into that echo chamber mindset of just everybody says the same thing or agrees with the same thing over and over again, and just don't go anywhere but the one direction.
Yeah, and it becomes really hard to like move culture as culture changes, and that could push some people away, or it comes into that issue back on like what I said initially. Like you don't have a good leader who can look at someone who has a dissenting opinion and pull them into their circle to be a dissenting opinion. Then you start to have that issue where like there's priorities handed to certain people whether or not they actually accomplish the roles that they need to accomplish properly, because there's no other people putting you in check or making you account for yourself unless a large part of the community riots, which we kind of just want that to not be the failsafe.
I agree.
Um,
And if there is change that we want to accomplish, we want to do it not in closed doors. We want to do it in front of a small audience that can provide feedback. And by small, I don't mean
Yeah.
7 people. I mean like 13, 20.
If you can get that much. Well, I mean, even if those people are just looking at it and not even commentating, yeah, sure.
Yep.
If
Just like we kind of like what we currently have right now.
Yeah. And I'm all for making things more public, because I dislike there being little barriers for people seeing conversation, because that blindsides people when they try and move up. They don't actually like see what the thought processes are or anything, and they don't see. Thank you for just scraping your mic.
Oh, my fault. I thought it was me.
And it doesn't help people understand like how their leaders actually conduct themselves. It just becomes this like, well, these people are saying these things about this person, so they must be doing these things kind of thing. Or you have to elevate yourself through some things. But do you have any commentary on that? If not, I can move into the pros and cons from my standpoint on the commissioner no commissioner thing. Shamu gave me consent to go on his idea, although there's not a huge number of differences between the two other than the lack of commissioner and how ownership is handled.
I'm sorry. I don't know what I missed. There was a raccoon that literally just like broke into my apartment, and my freaking roommate was freaking out. I think the biggest thing moving forward on that, before the pros con, would like setting aside like or possibly tailoring the powers of the commissioner, because the issues you brought up with CD's idea can also be described in part to like the general position of a commissioner. Like that commissioner would still have all of the problems possibly that CD's idea had and flaws. So like putting that into a pros con, I think we'd have to look at like how the commissioner with your idea would separate from the commissioner were the same responsibilities and problems that CD's idea had.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go back to the raccoon thing. So,
Are you just ditching out then?
I'm probably just gonna mute myself and pop in and out while my roommate and I deal with this.
Okay. Fuck. I don't know. Something about the person asking the question, you want them to hear the answer the most. After the last discussion regarding it, I figured out a better way to word exactly what I mean by how involved the commissioner gets in my idea versus not. And what it means to be like an admin decision that gets reviewed by them as a check and balance. And I'll start with the lower level, which is committees, other staff, etc. The people directly below admins, with people presenting things to move forward with to admins. And that is that they have an idea, they talk about it, they run through, they present it, and they also have their reason why this idea needs to be in place or something. Holy fuck, he killed the raccoon. Okay.
Dude.
Poor raccoon.
He hit it with a chair.
Poor little trash
Aw.
baby.
We had a foldable chair. He threw it in the garbage like
This is
outside.
the best podcast ever.
Dude,
I'm so sorry.
we should record these meetings more often. Maybe we'll get a higher raccoon
I
death.
do not want more raccoons to break in.
Okay.
He was
But-
so proud of himself. All right, keep going.
Back on topic. So those committees will have an idea, they present it to the admins. The admins run through the discourse with the committee. They either vote and move it forward because they don't see any problems with it, or they vote and they have problems with it and they clearly lay out those problems and the reason why they are not moving forward with the idea. And they present that back to the committee so that the committee, the staff, etc., so that they can refine it. The commissioner is not involved in that. So anything coming from the lowest level is not touched by the commissioner. That's how that ends up working out, because that's not an admin decision. That's a committee, a staff, or some other elevated group decision getting linked up to influence the lead. And that back and forth could probably go on for a long time. At some point there may be the want to elevate it, at which point you could either bring in the commissioner or have a bigger conversation about it, etc. In that situation, the commissioner's not making any decisions as much as they're arbitrating. So they're helping be a middleman between an admin group and the other group, and trying to get them to either compromise or not move forward with the idea in some fashion because there's these reasons that are being presented. On the other side, and again, in that situation, the commissioner's not actually doing anything other than mediating. So they're I don't know, leading the meeting. And then on the other hand, if the admins present a decision that they think needs to happen to change the league or influence it in some way, that is where the commissioner would come into play, so that the admins can't just soundbox on themselves and be like, "Oh, this will work." They have someone else who looks at it that has the ability to be like, "No." And it's not the people below them that they're regularly reviewing, because those people aren't necessarily looking at the broad prospects. They'll have different tunnels that they're in, and they may be pulled into the conversation, admins so decide, or what have you. But the purpose of the commissioner in this sense is to review that admin decision or that admin move on the league and point out problems with it for the longevity of the league, for the short term, to make sure that they're aware of the organizational impact. How much work does that add? How much overhead is that? How do you administrate it? How you acknowledge when it does and doesn't happen? Those kinds of things. And then that person, the commissioner, in this sense, would hypothetically be someone respected enough by the admins that if they give dissent to the admin's decisions and reasons why they're like, no, this isn't going to work, that it actually becomes a good conversation, because the whole purpose is that the commissioner gets elected out of the admin group.
Okay, so the commissioner would be acting more as like an overseer to the admins than like an overseer to like the general community.
Yes.
And like I imagine you'd have to outline his exact powers more specifically, which would be a farther detail like in the future.
Yeah.
But as far as his responsibilities go, it would be less so for the specifics of the league and more so for like overview and like longer or bigger term.
Yeah, higher order organizational impact. Because admins making decisions probably aren't like looking at I don't know, some committee and being like, yeah, these people need like 9 people on their committee. We're gonna like make a decision so that they have to have 9 people. That's probably not going to be the case. If that is, there's probably some other issues going on. But I'll digress from that. The point is that they review larger rule changes by admin decision instead of rule changes by community decision.
Alrighty. So what would the cons be? Like, granted, like Shamu's not here. Like from your own point, what would you see the cons be of this?
The big issues are the commissioner would probably have rights higher than the admin, and so they would see not just what the admins see, but like literally everything. And then they'd also have better server management, and if they decided to be flamboyant with their powers, they could probably start wrestling some people's jobs, like either through role removal or taking decisive action that's outside of the scope of their responsibilities, just because they have the ability to do so. Stuff like that.
Then
There's. Do you want to go, Melted?
if that's outside the responsibilities, then why do they have that power?
Because they have to have power over an admin.
Can
Does that mean they need to have Discord server power over an admin? Can't they have like Google Doc power over an admin?
But then
Like-
how do they like watch the discussion on admins and actually stay involved in the league enough so that they have context?
The role could be read only.
and you can also Zero has it to where in his server only he can remove the captain role. So if I have mod power, I can't take away any of the captain's roles. So you can lock roles to removing
Okay.
specifics.
So
On the read only, I don't think that that's constructive because they.
Okay, but not edit, but not delete, not you
not
know you don't have to.
moderation points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's feasible.
it sounds like we just kind of got through the biggest con, or like the biggest con we know of having the commissioner.
Just put them under.
It would take work, but yeah. I mean, that's also the point. Like, if it got to that point, there is still the owner, and it would be a fiasco. But things could be like controlled.
In the situation with the owner, I don't think any kind of structure really addresses that because
I meant more so like if a commissioner was like removing roles and starting to cause
Oh.
problems.
yeah, that's
Like we were talking about the server like moderation issues. Like if we weren't able to get certain things in check at that point, like the owner could step in,
yeah.
kind of like pause everything, and then admins and everything could get sorted out, or the commissioner could get sorted.
And a quick aside, I think Discord's role situation is that the higher up the role is, it gets everything below it in addition to whatever you put on it. It doesn't
No.
like if you put stuff if you mark stuff inactive on a role, even though it's higher up, it stays inactive.
What? What do you? What? Say again?
That's not true.
That's not true.
That is not true.
Okay.
It feels like that, but it's not.
Just making sure for the sake of this, because back on that moderation thing, I'm assuming that this hypothetical commissioner role would be either literally below admin or directly above it. One or the other, because it's supposed to be up in the organizational piece up here too. Like GMs are right under league organizers, which are right under admin. If you had him below like mods or something, it'd be harder to find. I think the only real huge con with the commissioner is the fact that they could, barring moderation and all of the role stuff, is that they could just sit there and veto admin decisions, and that's where the community really needs to like make sure that they see these kinds of things and it's not just arbitrary. Like the commissioner giving a probable cause for the reason they're vetoing an admin decision is something that's integral because it creates a discussion. But if they're not doing that and they're just vetoing admin decisions because technically they can, like that's a problem. That's not that you could view that as a structural problem, but that's more a community problem because we have these people being put in positions of power that aren't actually taking their role in the way that they should and thinking decisions.
Couldn't we create like a sort of like unanimous from maybe a certain spot, like unanimous vote from one group could override the veto of a commissioner, therefore like making sure that like if they really need something to get through and he's like just vetoing without cause so they know what to refine, they could potentially push it through.
You could.
I think all of that is in the checks and balances aspect of. I mean, any of these should have ways to like.
Yeah.
And have lower people of power be able to. In the military, they've got things like IQ and request mass, where like, even though people are above you, you can still request that things get handled by people above them.
Yeah.
So, just ways to circumvent just too much power at one level.
All right, sorry, you go ahead.
On that whole, if the community and the admins are going into this discourse and they're batting something back and forth, and the admins are just not relenting on the issue, the commissioner comes in as an arbitrator. Not because that they're going to make a decision, but because they can be like, you guys are kind of being assholes on one side or the other.
Yep.
That was the idea behind that, because it stops that headiness, but it doesn't stop the commissioner necessarily from being kind of heady on the admins.
If you were to put the commissioner role like directly below the admins and then still issue those checks and balances, I don't see at least I don't see like a major problem that couldn't be overcame. Like,
yeah, and
that's detailed stuff that you'd have to touch on, but most of these cons to having the commissioner with the responsibilities and powers you've outlined, I don't see as major cons compared to the pros that it could have as far as moving this league along to match like what we're looking to accomplish.
Technically, the e-board would do similar, but I think instead of it being like a small council, it's like a larger council, and then it starts siloing out from there.
The one aspect that has a huge advantage of is you basically have vice presidents of each one of those councils that has a stake in the pie for the overall league. So basically, you have the JCs that we had, except you have a chairman role or a vice president role, and all of those people are integrally created or whatever. They're involved a lot in decisions in the direction of the league.
Yeah, that does sound good.
And I think if we had enough. So, like, the big issue that I think we're going to have with keyboard is the fact that the majority of our leaders are already dedicated to being GMs. And they're not like GMs in the sense that they're leading like one team, or they have like two teams for like a minor and major part of the league. It's that they're GMs of 3+ teams more often than not, on top of doing other stuff.
They just really like RSC.
Yeah. And we even have some pretty decent turnover in GM season to season. And so like getting that kind of e-board on top of like the siloed communities, I think is going to be difficult. Not saying it's bad. That's not actually like a con. I'm just saying that's a hurdle we have to overcome.
I think the silos or like number of peoples, like that's something that could grow though. Like the foundation could be set with an even smaller group,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then like you said, it's a hurdle. But I think it could be like transitioned into smoother than rather like just trying to find people to fit roles.
That's a good point.
But we also don't have Shamu to say his thoughts on Commissioner. We also don't have a lot of people here that are versed in like e-board matters. But as of right now, I don't see an issue with Spoopy's proposal for a structure. But I also don't have a lot of knowledge on the e-board topic, so
The other big differentiation between mine and Shamu's idea, aside from the commissioner, was how ownership was handled. And mine was just handed off to someone who doesn't get involved in upper administration. Like, they can be a part of the community or something, but not upper administration. And Shamu's was that the admins cycle passwords or like the single account. They all like know and have access to it. And so every time we cycle admins, that account should technically cycle passwords. My big concern with that is that it actually puts us in a worse situation because you, instead of having one person who could fuck up and then you could just like, I don't know, harass them, phase them, talk to them, try and talk them down. You have 5 potential people who have access.
There's an
to
accountability
that.
problem.
Yeah, and if one of them goes in and changes the password to something completely arbitrary, they're now the only person with access.
Yep.
And it's, I mean, like, you can put some stuff to administrate that or check it every once in a while, etc., etc. But, like, ultimately you end up having a lot of overhead for this problem that, like, it's going to exist either way. But now it exists in 5 people's hands, and that might put peer pressure on it, which is a big pro. So they might like not do anything vile because they know that they are one of the only 5 that could be acknowledged for doing it.
You run into the situation of, do you remove one head or do you remove all 5 because nobody wants to be held responsible?
Yeah, and then at that point, how do you actually recover the account?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, arguably there's going to be an email address and other stuff, and it depends on who actually has access to that. But again, that person who locked out the owner role could probably just lock out all of everything else, or
Yeah.
a fair number of it.
Good points.
But like, that's something we face regardless. It doesn't matter what kind of restructuring we're trying to do. If people are really that timid about the owner thing, they need to just put someone in place that they don't think is going to fuck over the league.
Well, I mean, does it really fuck over the league? I mean, we can move Discord servers and move a bot, and everything kind of can continue the way it is. How much are we set on just this Discord?
A lot of work. Like,
Sure.
and then, I mean, like, arguably with the new server, you don't have that problem. But like, you have to reset up everyone's roles. outside
Okay,
of all
okay.
of the channels and history that's lost if someone just deletes the server.
That's true.
I mean, the big issue is trying to get everyone's attention for a long enough period of time without that person just repeatedly breaking how you deliver the information to the new server. But we're talking like horrible worst case scenarios, not just bad leadership at this point. So
Yep.
I don't think we're gonna face any of that anytime soon. Like I could give a shit less if Kate just kept the ownership for a very long period of time. But I don't know. I do think we need to have someone in that position who doesn't think of themselves as owner of anything other than just like, yeah, the server has my name stapled right below it. It's cool. Um, so I'm thinking that we should just have this is kind of silly, but like the e-board idea, and then we should merge mine and Shamu's and just talk about the commissioner side of it with Shamu at some point, and then determine whether or not we want to move that idea forward with or without the commissioner, and then have CD's idea as the third runner-up. No one seemed really in favor of the JC idea, and I mean, we don't have Scribs here, so I kind of feel like it's a little unfair because I think he could actually advocate for the JC idea, but we can do some kind of poll and try and get some more input on that, and then toss out one of the other ideas if there's actually enough positive input on the JC idea over some other idea. Does anyone disagree?
Are there any
Nope,
other
I like it.
ideas or thoughts or anything else like out there that people would want to see or want to hash out before we basically move this into a how does everyone feel about these 5 ideas or 4 ideas and get that general consensus? Because I think that's basically where we're at the point of.
Yeah, I was hoping there'd be a little bit more turnout for this one because everyone seemed to want to talk structure like a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not really a whole lot of frameworks. I mean, you could hypothetically make up a million frameworks. Alternatively, we could do something much more akin to like the United States, or start modeling some other foreign government that we know probably less about collectively as a community.
Or even businesses, board of directors, things like that.
Yeah, I think the e-board actually kind of is similar to board of directors. Probably not completely analogous, but more akin to that. The issue with business is it usually comes to a head. Like, straight up, this person has the final say on what happens. And yeah, there's this group of people that can remove them, but they still have the final say. Welcome, Fiend.
Hello.
That kind of thing. Other ninjas typing. Hello. A little confused. Why? Oh. Oh, when you mean you have more on league structure, do you mean like different committee groups or different ways to handle rule change and stuff like that? More of the detail.
No, I mainly mean just like player side, like structure and like who would be running more tournaments and overall basically just like improving the quality of player engagement and and activities like for these guys to keep them entertained, keep them coming back to the Discord, keep them engaged, even through the off season as well.
Oh, like integrating that into the structure.
Yep.
Okay, and you think that that is kind of irrelevant to any upper administrative structure, and you can just fit that in?
No, I mean it's just I just don't have any input towards any like big admin stuff. It's more smaller committee stuff that maybe admins oversee, but more smaller committees that can be appointed to handle those different areas.
Talk about it. I mean, it's
Uh,
not tangential. Like, it's the bottom
yeah.
part of this structure. You can't have a
Mhm.
pyramid without a base.
Right, yeah. I mean, like it would be good to get more of a hold. I felt like the RSC structure now there was definitely quite a few bit of like league organizers and everything, but it still felt like it was a little bit of people doing a lot of bit of things. And so just if you have people interested in honing in like one little aspect, they can be um, like a head of a small committee that handles just tournaments, or head of a small committee that handles um, or part of a bigger committee that handles more of like uh, league structure for future seasons, like tiers, MMR caps, and all that. But I haven't like thought all this out yet.
Okay, so you're talking about, like, so previously we've had it where, like, these are the things we're looking for. Do you want to do any of these things? You're talking about presenting that along with what do you actually want to do so that we can have a conversation about it and see if that facilitates some of the needs in ways that we didn't think about. You're talking about integrating something like that into it?
Kind of. Sorry, I was just having a hard time understanding.
Um, did you ever apply for a staff role?
I did way back when.
You remember how, like, it had a bunch of names for the staff roles and then, like,
Mhm.
what their kind of duties were?
Yeah.
So moving forward, there's almost certainly going to be something similar to that in regards to, like, we need someone to do this thing because it benefits the league for this reason.
Yeah.
But then also, like, what you're talking about, there's not actually a role for that. I mean, we have tournament organizer, but we don't have, like, a role specifically for devising different ways to get the community engaged and acting on it and, like, testing things out. We've run around the experimental league thing, but we need to have someone who actually administrates that. And
Research and development.
yeah, R&D.
That's what you're getting behind right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't have an R&D department that just like is a think tank for ways that we can keep this community moving forward. And there's a couple different committees or groups that could be formed that could be in charge of that and constantly be presenting ideas to an echelon of people.
Yeah, and then when those ideas come out, we have to have people who actually move on them. And I guess, like, that's where you can get the more defined roles of, like, this, we need someone to do this thing because we have this think tank running through it, and here's the pros and cons of it, and we think we should actually try this out. But then, like, when you have people who are like, I want to help the league, I don't know how, you can open up a conversation. What I was saying is you can be like, well, what are you good at doing?
Yep.
Like, what do you
What are you
feel
good
like
at doing?
how do you want to help the league? If they don't have answers to that, you can give them this document saying, like, here's what we need. Like, does any of this interest you?
Yeah, I like that.
Are you willing to do any of this? And if you are, like, can we just slot you in? Where can we slot you in? But yeah, and then you can have some training. I think something else that we have to do in any of these structures when it comes to staff onboarding is, like, establish some very shorthand training for conduct. But,
Short, not behavior guidelines. It's 33 pages.
Short, like, here are. So you know how we just did a mission statement and core values thing?
Don't be an asshole.
Don't be an asshole. Something similar to that. Like, this is what, like, here is your goal as a member of this part of the staff. Like, this is ultimately what you should be rallying behind, and here are some ways you should be going about doing that. and then like actually having that conversation and back and forth at some point, like kind of like an interview process, like what I'm gonna do with Natty on Sunday, and I can see with him about recording that and just throwing it up on YouTube, so you guys can get a better feel for what I'm talking about when I say like have a discussion with somebody about something, because we need people in all roles who are more willing to ask questions than make decisions. Back on the like
That's
R&D
true.
think tank, but like in general, you need to ask a lot of questions before you make a decision. And the bigger of an impact that decision has, the more questions you should be asking. And we've had a prolific lack of that. And when you put people into staff roles and they have like, you can have clearly outlined duties. That's fine, but when you go to address the community, you need to know how to address dissent. You need to know how to handle criticism and whatnot. And like that's derailing, but that's I think is very integral to how we move forward and how we actually handle any structure. Is we have to put in room for the community or other people to have dissenting opinions, and for us to figure out how we can let that be properly addressed. Not like, hey, fuck you, you fucked up, but like, hey, I think this is wrong. If they can't figure out why, help them, because they have a feeling and we should at least discuss that. Unless it's already been discussed, in which case we can point into that, but I digress.
All good points.
Did anyone else have any movements on structure on any level? What about GM involvement? We've talked a lot about admin and kind of like staff committee stuff, but what about GM involvement? How involved do we want them to be? How involved should we expect them to be?
I've got one fear there, and that is GMs trying to utilize their role as GM to also give them an advantage at being an elevated role in the league. It's one of the reasons the PC was very against league organizers and admins and GMs being members of the player committee, because they already had power in that ability. They already had bias. And yes, we want their opinions counted for as players, but we don't want their power added to. So that's my only concern there is it's tough to get other people involved that aren't GMs, because GMs do have this want and desire to improve the league that they're a big player in. But just making sure that the checks and balances are in the right place so that they can't abuse the system, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Which
Gain unfair advantage.
yeah. And if you ended up having a GM in an elevated role, like an admin or commissioner role, would you see a problem with that? Would you expect those roles to not be GMs or 2 ICs?
I don't have any expectation for it to not happen. I expect for good checks and balances to be there so that if a decision is questioned, there is a way to remove their power and reverse whatever they did.
Okay.
Yeah, the only issue I would see would be kind of like not giving one role your full attention, but at the same time, like if they're willing to take it or they want to see like improvement to that degree, I don't think it's like we have checks and balances to make sure nothing bad happens. I think like that's their place to step up.
So a higher order of what role comes before what other role. Being an admin comes before being a GM.
Yeah. I don't really know. I don't see any reason why a GM or a second in command couldn't be an admin. I don't think I don't see how that could lead to bias like it would in like the player committee. I honestly could only see good come from it as far as experience goes as to what they're looking for. The only issue I think would be like balancing time.
Yeah. And that's a pretty reasonable issue, actually. Because like I'm not a GM, but I do manage 2 of the teams on my franchise. And in part with that, I haven't really been paying a lot of attention to one of the teams. I'm on one of the other teams I manage, but I haven't been paying attention to the other one so much. And probably would be better if I was. But I've been doing this, which has absolutely nothing to do with stats. Okay. So, GMs having experience doesn't put a lot of fear in putting them in elevated roles as long as they're vetted properly and there's good checks and balances for reversing decisions.
Yeah.
I think the whole thing with me in this situation is if you're willing to put them in a GM role as is, why would you not be available to put them in a higher role?
Yeah, 100%.
Because
like,
if you're already putting them in that GM role, I mean, you're already giving them so much as it is. So you obviously trust that person to some degree. So I don't see why it would be an issue to have them be even a higher role than that.
There was never a vetting process for GMs. GMs could just hand over their team to whoever they wanted.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think once you're a GM, you should lock in for the season. Granted, things happen, personal life things, health things, you name it. But
I think Fiend's getting at there's a certain amount of like respect that comes with being elevated to a GM role and actually participating in that successfully. What constitutes success is what Memlo is arguing.
yeah, just like I said, I think you guys are questioning the whole: should they be an extra role? Should they be an admin? Should they be this? Should they be that? You know.
I'm just
My
bringing
thing
it up
is-
because it's been brought up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
personally don't have any issues with GMs being in elevated roles because I think that they're already the leaders of this league. And if they decide to take on more, they should very much so be able to because they're already sort of proving themselves as leaders because they're managing multiple teams. And you can see their conduct, and the community can see their conduct from either being on those GM's teams or being in other roles and seeing how they interact with other people on different channels. So, I in that regard, I think there's balance enough in that if a GM tried to go into an elevated role and the community had enough backlash, so they're like that would be the signal. Otherwise, GMs are usually good people.
Yeah, just like I said, as a pointer, if you already put them in that role, you obviously know that they're okay. If they're not, then that's an issue in the first place. They shouldn't have been GM to begin with.
Or that should be being evaluated.
Yeah.
Snipe.
Can I help you?
You're the only GM in this chat.
Ah, that makes sense.
And he's also the only GM in this chat that's been an admin before. And has done it very successfully. That's why I kind of argue this point.
Oh,
That
yeah.
can be argued. I don't know if admin and successful can go together.
Yikes.
I disagree.
He's an avid supporter.
I am. And that's not just coming because he's my franchise guy, whatever. That's just a true definition of character and how I feel about it.
Fair enough.
I mean, I would say that we're not in this position without the absolute visual of abuse of power and a GM. I mean,
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's going to be those people out there, but
And that's the kind of thing that we want to acknowledge in our structure to some degree. We don't want to idealize it too much. And I don't think we have in like the loose skeleton. But as we get into the nitty-gritty, that's definitely something like where we'll have to be a little bit more legalese. Not specifically on GMs, but like in general having proper checks and balances and ways to circumvent them that intention-wise, like anything is abusable. And I think that's another thing that like really needs to get discussed at some point is that society functions on a certain level of trust.
So, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
So, all I've heard this whole time I've been watching chat and other stuff is checks and balances, like back and forth constantly. You'll have people in multiple roles abusing power, yada, yada, yada. How big is this thing, this elevated thing, gonna be to the point where can you get anything done? Can you take any responsibility when if you don't want admins to be GMs, if you don't want staff to be intermingled, and you're just gonna have all these gobs and gobs of people? When is responsibility gonna happen? Because that's typically in the past why it fell to admins, because nobody else could get anything done.
And that's why I'm bringing it up and advocating that we don't. So, like, GMs should be able to go into elevated roles. Staff should be able to go into elevated roles. 2ICs should be able to go into elevated roles. I think, like, even transaction managers, to some degree, should not have as much pressure on them in regards to, like, not being able to step up as a 2IC. I guess, like, stepping up as a GM is the more arguable one, but I agree with you. I think these discussions need to happen, but they don't need to happen on a role basis. I brought that up personally because that has been brought up so many times, and I want to contend it openly because I don't want it to just be some side conversation that's happening that people kind of like rally behind, and then we don't really have proper conversation or dissent about it. Like, we need to actually discuss why we're trying to do that, because ultimately you're segueing away your leaders, or sequestering, not segueing, away your leaders from leadership roles, and that doesn't help anybody. Um, so we have some ideas for loose structures. What is the next part of structure that we actually want to tackle that we can talk about in these structures?
What do admins actually do?
Okay.
Because that's where I'm lost, because at this point, it seems like bits and pieces are just out. So that'd be good to know, at least, unless it's written somewhere that I haven't read between the 9,000 words.
Probably not. It's all been pretty abstract so far. So, in terms of what admins actually do, what do people have in mind for that? Personally, I think that they mostly should be reviewing decisions and making very few. They shouldn't be actively involved in like drafting in like rule changes or large league changes. I think they should be mostly involved with like reviewing GMs, reviewing decisions that come up from committees, and having discourse in that, and being involved in committees as they please. And being involved just means like talking with them, like whether that be going into the committee and being like, "Hey guys, like why aren't we discussing this?" Or like when there is discussion, like asking questions from a secondary perspective that may not have been addressed in that specific committee. That kind of stuff. I think that should be admin responsibility because it's very community oriented and, well, technically administrative, but it's not so detail oriented. It's more just like keeping up to date and then like making sure that your leadership people are good leadership people, not like revoking them for various reasons, but just making sure that they're able to conduct themselves.
I have a question on that. So if the whole point of the admin is to make like few decisions, but mostly be there for administration roles, as in like community outreach and whatnot, then the whole point of the commissioner being there to overview the admin
It's
seems
unnecessary.
Yeah, it seems really unnecessary. If the admin is there just to kind of like overview these different like I forgot the word you used, like these different commissions or whatever,
Yeah.
or these
Committees.
seats, committees. Thank you, commissions. What?
Commission
If like the admin are there to overview committees and not make decisions, but kind of just keep them in line, then the whole role of commissioner as far as like a check and balance to the admin kind of seems unnecessary and just like a random position of power that doesn't need to exist.
That really depends on what the final say on what admins do and don't do is. So, like, I'm saying that they shouldn't be making very many decisions. That does still mean that ultimately they will make a decision at some point. And you can see situations like that, and I'm not going to go into the details of it, but when you remove a GM, like, that should be something that's reviewed. It shouldn't be something that just happens and then there's, like, either community outrage or whatever the fuck. Someone should actually be reviewing that. That's the whole purpose of the commissioner in my eyes, is to review decisions like that. Or,
Well, I think that's what. Sorry.
when you have people getting moved into elevated roles and the commissioner's seen something that maybe like someone didn't look over, they can bring that to attention, because the idea behind the commissioner is that they stay informed, kind of like a mod would, but they're doing it more to give guidance and less to moderate, so they're looking at it from a different perspective.
I think what Moose is trying to get at here is that we're so worried about taking things away from admin and, you know, spreading out responsibility that you're almost just taking too much away from them at once. You're basically just making that role, kind of like you said, almost unnecessary or pointless at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas you're putting these people kind of at your head front of the league, but then you're also saying at the same time, oh no, they're just there for when shit goes wrong. Like, that doesn't really, you know. I
I'd
don't
counter
think sit
slightly.
well.
I'd say he's redefining what it means to be a moderator and what it means to be an admin.
Yeah, that's my biggest point. Is like we're setting someone up who's able to stop admin, but we don't even know what admin do. So like, where are we drawing the line between admin and moderator? And I think that's like a pretty good starting point before you move into what are these committees and how will they be ran, and should there be or shouldn't be there be a commissioner? Because depending on how we're using admin as more of a moderator or an administrator, will kind of warrant what we need. And I feel like we're moving too far into controlling the powers of these groups without setting aside what their responsibilities are. And we're
So,
kind of like getting like we're tripping ourselves up here.
so
At least that's what I'm seeing.
in terms of moderation, I have if you're talking about reviewing committee decisions as moderation, or talking to GMs and like making sure GMs come in as responsible GMs as moderation, I'm not entirely sure that I'm talking about all of moderation. I don't think admins should be like watching all of the channels go down, and when someone calls someone else a cunt, deleting that and then like giving them strikes. I don't think admins should be involved in that at all. I don't think they should be involved in community moderation on any level. If we had like a moderation committee that like elevated decisions, admins should review that. But I don't think admins should be moderators.
100%.
That I'm not entirely certain where that's coming from, even, because the way I described it, I actually am moving very far away from them being moderators. Not because I think that they need to lose power, but because that's very minutia oriented and time consuming. Like, moderators are, you could covet the position to some degree, but really you're a workhorse. Like, you're sitting there making sure that community guidelines are followed, and that is hard.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question in the first place about what admins actually do had nothing to do with moderation. It was more in the case of, admin decisions that go through in terms of, I mean, you can go through the list of admin action review, right? Things that have gone through that are, either MMR related or something, some insane situation that comes up. Is that handled by a specific group or a, conjunction of a ton of groups that have to sit there and debate forever until it's too late? Or, about bringing on these groups in the first place, like who's doing that? Because if the groups themselves don't exist, then how do you get the groups to exist? That's more of my concern.
Yeah, and in regards to that, I'm personally advocating a two-party system where like one party addresses whatever issues come up, and it's not admins unless it's GM related, and even then that's debatable. And that party runs through the conversation, comes up with a decision, and then they bring it to the admins, and the admins seriously just review it. Because that is what they should be doing. They should be looking at like league-wide impact and trying to make sure that people aren't like overstepping into crazy bounds or things that could have like very detrimental consequences or that could be very abusable. In my eyes, in like, but that's because I don't view admins as moderators. I don't view them as anything other than our primary leaders. And our primary leaders, like any like director of operations or CEO, should be primarily looking at things from this high level and being like, what is the negative impact all the way down? What is the positive impact all the way down? How do I advocate for this?
For me, that's looking at different levels of view. We call that 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 foot view, and admins would be at the 5,000, mods would be at the 1,000, and the leader, the CEO, whatever group it is, the e-board would be looking at that 10,000. So you just have like the different elevations of what issues that they're actually looking at and dealing with. And for me, I get behind that 100%.
In the case of an e-board, why would you have an e-board and admins?
Don't know that I would. I'm just throwing out like you have these different groups or different structures, ideas, and you can
Okay.
basically still have the same echelons of looking at different things.
Okay, I just wanted clarification because like I think if we have admins, they would be at that 10,000.
And committees at 5,000, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and then the commissioner would sit like between the two, or like only there for admin decisions, pretty much.
He'd sit alongside admins, so he'd be like right at that 10,000 view, just holding them accountable for
Okay.
keeping that view. Kind of like setting the bar, I guess, is the best way. But like back on like admin decision making, I really don't think that they should be making a lot of major decisions. They should be the ones who are vetting decisions to make sure that they're not bad decisions. And like I don't really know how much else to talk about that, but like even with the e-board, if you have a bunch of people on the e-board, it's going to be the same scenario in my opinion. Those people in those elevated roles, they're going to be involved in their individual committees, but in terms of like the e-board collective, if they're coming together to make any kind of decision, like that should be a very high profile decision and not like a change to a rule or whether or not this person should be banned or whether or not this person should no longer be banned. Like those kinds of decisions should be like tailored to moderators or people who like community watch maybe for bans. Like, well, do these people actually like deserve to come back? Are they actually trying not to be detrimental in some way?
So,
So,
like, you got it, Snipe.
sorry. So I think this was brought up before, but there was a discussion previously about these, let's say 5 admins. Again, everything's hypothetical, but let's say these 5 admins, they would, like one apiece would oversee these committees, not in a way of making decisions for them, but more of just, like you described, what admins do or are supposed to do, reviewing decisions and whatnot. Like, would that be something that they could be a part of? Because I could see that being a positive involvement without overstepping.
Yeah.
Like not being able to just insta veto, but at least give them something to want. Because like in my eyes, from what you discussed about what admins do, like why the hell would anybody want to be an admin if they do nothing? Meanwhile, if at least that they have something, a committee they're overseeing or they're involved with, you got to keep them involved, no different than players and what have you. So I think they should definitely be overseeing some committee, no matter how far broken out they are, just to help them. If they're the ones that are elected, most likely the ones that people trust the most, at least, upon election, who knows from there. But, they trust them to to be that person involved. They might have even come from a committee prior,
Yeah.
and they were kind of the vocal leader then. So, why not have them oversee? I think at least if you add that in with the stuff you said, then it makes that position relevant. And commissioner, I'm still on, just because
You can axe
with
that for all I care.
yeah, like with everything else being said, like yeah, of course you want checks and balances for admins, but if they're not heavy in decision making, what is there to check and balance necessarily?
Yeah, that was my biggest thing when I was talking about the moderation thing. Like the moderation word, I think caught a lot of people up. It was more so like, is the commissioner like super relevant if what we're talking about is like these responsibilities of admin not being so much? But it's the biggest point, like that the commissioner isn't. If we're taking, or not even taking away, if we're changing the responsibilities of admins to overseeing committees for the most part, like, do we need the commissioner there?
Okay.
And that's I think that could be something that could be like instated, like that could be put there later in, like if we see that. But
Snipe hit on one of my biggest concerns, and it's that the more elevated you get role wise, the more your time is consumed. And I don't think that should be the case necessarily. And it's not to say that you can't put in more time. It's that you shouldn't have a higher time requirement, because it does put a barrier on a lot of people, especially when you have a community where everyone's either working full time or going to college, and there's very few people who aren't doing one of those. But Snipe hit on it so that like you have the admin involvement, so that they aren't spread too thin and like dedicating too much time, but they also feel like they have purpose. And on the commissioner, like that would be like a lazy role. Like it would be very much reading and just a lot of reading. But it's not the idea behind that is not so much to give someone something very proactive or something where they're actively doing a lot of things. It's to give them a role where they shouldn't come into play a lot, but they actually care about watching the direction of the community, and then they can get involved where they see fit. That's more that idea, is they're kind of just like a freelance consultant running around, but they're not required to dedicate their time. But like currently, our admins are probably just making decision reviews and talking about all kinds of different things constantly that they more than likely shouldn't need to. But,
okay.
And
I have more of a question than like a comment here. So would admins be elected from the committee, or just like could any community member? Because if admins will be overseeing committees, it makes sense to me that the admin should know the functioning of that community, and probably like our committee. The admin should at least like have come from within the committee, if that makes sense.
a given committee.
Yeah, like
That's
if I was
the
in,
barrier of entry.
yeah, like if I got like elected by the community to be like in a committee, like the player committee, you know, I wouldn't want some random admin to get elected and then just like I've been in it for 2 seasons now. I wouldn't want a random admin just assigned to this committee. I would want someone from within the player committee. Like I could vote, like Memlo, and like have them move up and then take that responsibility because he understands the functioning of that committee.
There's some leeway in learning curve, in my opinion, with that, and that is that you're not going to be able to get admins always directly pulled out of your community or your committee,
Right.
because it's more than likely going to be the case that we have way more than 5 committees. Like, it probably double that at some point. Not right out the gate, but at some point, because we're gonna end up, if we actually plan on having this league continue to grow, not in terms of like the number of people who actually enter the RSCC, but in terms of like how much attention we attract and how many free agents we keep around, and how much community outreach we do, like you end up having these roles get more and more specialized and they break out more. And hypothetically, those would become different committees of people.
Okay, so would it make sense then that the committee would still vote for the admin that oversees them? Like different people could run; they don't have to be from the committee. Because like
potentially, I think that's definitely something we could talk about down the road.
my confusion comes from more so like overall, like my confusion is like how does the admin get elected for the role they're going to be seeing, and like how do you determine which admin is for which committee?
And I don't think we've actually begun to touch on that. So, if you have, does anyone else want to answer this? I've been talking a lot. That's the only reason I'm asking.
I think it's a great question, and I don't think we have the answer to it, and it should maybe drive some discussion about what people would want to see. I don't think we have to come up with that answer right now.
I mean, yeah, like I'm
was
more
gonna
than
give a
happy to like to
spitball.
talk about it next week too. Like for me, it makes sense that the committee should be voting for the admin to oversee them. The admin doesn't have to come from within the committee. Like the committee could hold the election at the time, and like if a random person in the community wants to run, if someone from within the committee wants to run, or say it was a GM or a separate admin that had just been a chair of another committee, that committee can decide this person has been working on this, and like we respect them, and you know, like that can be. But it doesn't make sense to me that the community who hasn't seen like the committee is working or another admin should just like insert themselves into a committee, and that seems like it would kind of delay things getting done, at least in the beginning of that person's job as admin.
Yeah, and that's back on the learning curve. But to your point, I don't entirely disagree. The things I would caution against are you will probably have like 2 or 3 of the admins who get pulled a lot of different ways between committees, and 1 or 2 admins, if not 3, who don't get like voted on as much. And then
Yeah, you wouldn't want to see it become a popularity contest.
not even a popularity thing. Like these are the people I know who get shit done, so I'm voting for them because they know how we work, etc. But what if that's like two to three people, and we have 5 admins? Then there's like 2 admins who aren't getting voted on to have responsibilities. And it's not, again, not a popularity thing in my eyes. Like if you're actually talking about it in terms of workload, you're having these people determine the burden of the workload for this group that should be a more even distribution.
I saw admin as more of like a chairman, like a representative of each committee. So like if like the admin would have to apply for the committee that they would want to be like an admin of.
Okay.
And that would apply to like the whole community as well. Like that's the 10,000-foot view. They would see their committee and they would see down. And then the admin as a group would come together and like speak of what all their committees are accomplished. Like
Well,
that
at that
is what's,
point,
that's how I saw it.
yeah, just a quick little point there. Instead of making the admin the head of all these committees, why don't you just appoint a committee head?
Yeah, like that's more what I was hitting on. Is like an admin should represent a committee. That way, you're not having admins pulled 3 ways and then an admin not doing anything.
Can you write that question up, Moose, so that we have it going into discussion for this week? I think that'd be very helpful. If you guys don't mind, can I write down a couple action items going into this as well? Because I have to bounce and this is gonna run along.
Yeah. Oh, I was gonna
Which question? I was kind of just throwing things out. Like what?
Specifically around admins, their responsibilities, and how do they get elected to admins? I guess how do they get elected to admins was your specific question.
Yeah.
And what do they oversee?
And in terms of committee heads, I think even if we have admins, we should have committee heads. Like as we expand, like early on, probably not something we really need to pay attention to. Down the road, like if we have like 7, 8, 9 committees, committee heads become more and more pressing.
Yeah, I could see that like seasons from now, but right now I think if you were to try to put that there, like Snipe said, the admin responsibility would be so low.
Yeah, but yeah, and this is all just spitballing.
Yeah.
I do think having admins, like, these are the committees that you guys should be focusing on, or having some way to direct them when they move into their role, so that they have something that they feel like they have ownership over, would be good.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if the word ownership's what you want to use there.
Thank you.
In my eyes, ownership is not like I own this as in I possess it. It's I'm owning up to the consequences of whatever comes out of this and the responsibility for making sure that it's successful.
Ownership is a triggering word
Responsibility
right
was
now.
the word you were looking for from
Yeah.
the get.
I'm about to say you want to type that in general and see how that goes.
Please do.
No, I'm just playing. But yeah, on that too with the admins thing, can we add how do committee members get elected?
Yeah, that's a good one too. Like, does an admin, like, does the committee chair like pick people that, what is it called?
Well,
Like they apply. Like, how would the admin pick from people that apply for the committee, or does the pot like is that a way that the community votes people into committees?
It depends on if we have a top down or bottom up structure. So, like, if we have a bottom up, then you'd have community voted into committee, committee voting up admin or staff, however you want to phrase that, and then from there voted up into admin. If you have top down, you have your admins voted in by pretty much everyone, and then they build the structure down from there. So, like, they pull people in, they or like these people should be being voted into these spots, kind of thing. Not saying like this person's the chair of the committee, but these people are voted into this pool of people. I think we're going to end up having a bottom up kind of approach more often than not.
I just feel like that gets too messy, and it's a huge popularity stunt, no matter which way you want to put it.
Yeah,
Until you
also
hit the
agree.
committees. I mean,
Until you get
once
to committees, it's just like I said, you're allowing the community to, at that point, just totally move the whole organization.
well, I mean, they did already, but
No.
That's I thought what we were trying to prevent here.
Bottom up is community votes into committee. Committee does all the work from there. Top down is community votes into the admin. Admin does all the work from there.
Mhm.
That's what I mean. Because at some point there has to be a voting for who goes into what position. It just determines, like, are you voting on the topmost position first or the bottommost position first?
I think it would be the most beneficial, especially. I mean, that's a tough one because we have people with the most experience. So like it would make sense that the people with the most experience can get in there first, and then we work everything else out. But you'd also see it the other way, where we have such a large group of people that are knowledgeable in committees already. That, but then you could run into the issue like, all right, we have people that are experienced as a committee, but would they get voted on? Like, what happens when people in this chat right now don't get the position that we see, like, and that's the issue you're gonna run into anywhere right now. Is like that why it makes more sense to go top down first is because like we already have movers and shakers that know this, and then from there we can establish everything in between. But if you try and go bottom up, like that means people that want to be admin are first applying for committees, and they have to make sure they get in that committee, and then they're getting voted up. And it seems messy.
What's the
to try and go
entry for a committee? That's not something that we need to answer. I'm letting you know, like, that becomes the big question for determining how hard it is to become an admin.
Right.
That needs to be a topic, though. That barrier of entry, that's huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is really big.
Definitely.
So I'm gonna hit enter on this. I've got a couple of these ideas in there. Is there anything else that needs to get added so that you guys can continue discussion without me, and that everything gets mentioned that we had already kind of decided action items on?
I think we've gone beyond mentioning the action items that we had previously set up, since we're actually talking about the pros and cons of different ways to elect people in.
I agree, and that's why I've got that last bit so that you guys can keep talking about it. And if you want to add to it, feel free. But I'm just trying to make sure that that's covered before I bounce.
I think we're probably going to wrap up in the next 15 minutes because we've got plenty to go off of in terms of discussion points.
I actually also have to duck now. I think deciding how
There's a duck in your apartment now?
dude, too soon. I'm actually like worried. I think deciding which direction the election is gonna go and how messy that could become is gonna be a big one. And then I also think I'm really distracted about the duck in my apartment comment. I can't think about the rest of my thing. Anyways,
Talk about barriers of entry for various roles.
Yeah.
Establish
And then-
which one becomes point one and which one is point two. And then outline the rest of the conversation that Memlo already talked about.
absolutely. All right, I will hopefully see you guys next week. Have a good one.
See ya.
On his point, I wanted to bring up, but he already left. But I was gonna say, it's not like we're starting from scratch. There's already people around, so it's not like you literally are saying there's no staff, there's no admins. We're starting from day one, and it's just popularity contest to see who gets in first, type of thing. So I think that was kind of his concern, is that we're just chopping the whole thing, and I hope we're not, and starting from scratch. So I think that might have been his concern a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know if we are not the whole thing, but I don't know how much of it we are chopping. Because I know that, like, depending on how much of a restructure we do, we have to chop some of it. But on the other hand, like, holding another admin election in the off season is not going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, you're talking about, you're going to get rid of all staff so nobody knows how to do stats and website, and then letting them from popular vote? Like, there's no way that'll work. You know what I mean? So there has to be people involved that have been involved before. You can't just start from scratch. And I think that was partially his maybe fear.
I don't think he was talking about staff, which is why I wasn't addressing that at all.
But staff, in the sense of how we're looking at things, is committees now? Is that wrong?
Okay, so when you talk about axing something and you talk about staff, the context to me is current staff. And the current definition of staff being like LOs. And then technically admins and maybe GMs if you really want to include them. When you talk about axing staff and you're talking about the future definition of staff, which could potentially include committees, I'm not really sure how to answer that.
Okay. I don't know what else to say there. The way I see committees and how we've been talking about this whole time is that you have different committees for, I mean,
no,
otherwise it's just a group of people that just talk in a circle if they don't actually do things.
I don't disagree with that. I just don't think of current staff as committee members. I guess is the disparity, and that might be some problem on my end. But yeah, I get you. I understand. That's what I'm trying to get at. I understand you now. I just didn't at first because the stupid reason I laid out. Do we want to wrap this up? Do we hit enough points? Is there any more questions? Is there any more comments?
I mean, plenty of questions, but not very many.
You have plenty of questions?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, eventually this has to all happen. So, I mean, we're gonna have to ramp it up a little bit, right? I mean, how are you gonna go into the off season with all this on the slate?
I mean, I guess okay. So off season happens in like 3 weeks, though.
Yeah.
Sure, it does.
And what he's saying is we need to mat out a lot of this shit before the next season comes around.
Yeah, and that's currently the plan. We have that timeline outlined. That's why we're talking about this in more of a nitty gritty and not so much in an abstract. And like when other ninja brought up his question, I'm like, shoot it, because we need to talk about that. Like we have more clearly laid out mission statement and core values. We like talked a lot about that, and I don't think that we needed to like rush through that, but it did need to get talked about. Now we're talking about structure. Again, don't think we need to rush through it, but it does need to get talked about. And that's pretty much all we need. In terms of like elections and whatnot, that can all just start running from the point where we have a decision made through the off season. I don't see us having any issue starting next season with a complete restructure in place. And I fully expect us to have a structure decided on, and then maybe details getting discussed. So like these 3-4 structures that we're going to be talking about in the next week or so, I imagine we're going to pick one of them and just run with it. And then from there, we're going to start establishing these conversations about committees and like which ones we need to establish first and why. And then in the next week, we'll have an idea for committees, and then we'll be polling the starting people for committee X, Y, Z. We have admin spots that are open, so we're gonna have to run elections for that, and so on. Does that answer your concern?
Yep.
Okay. I don't really have anything else, and pretty much everyone's dipped out except the 4 of us. Well, Bad's here, but what the fuck is this still beyond doing? Bad's here, but he hasn't really talked. The best lurker around. Yeah. If you guys don't have any more questions, we can conclude this.
Okay, no problem. I don't.
Okay. Now, are you gonna save the other loads and loads of questions for when more conversation comes up about the specifics?
Yep.
Okay.
Because I need details, and then we go into it. I can't just come off the top of my head until I see some things. So, yeah, I mean, this was good to see at least structure into a point and talk about it.
Yeah.
But like I said, the committee thing is the one that I really want to dive into as we get there. I'm not trying to rush you guys either, but that's the
get you.
part I care about is that true structure, the detail behind it, because I don't want you guys to have to rewrite, the entire entity of RSC in a matter of months.
Yeah. And bear in mind, like, this whole thing is to get people together to spitball publicly, and then bring up questions and concerns publicly so we can continue to spitball. It's not a decision-making process for this whole meeting. At least that's not how I've been looking at them, because like I actually don't really know like what the deciding factor is on any of this, other than we're all working toward it, so we kind of expect the conclusions to come out when we have defined conclusions to move forward. But I think the more public meetings are going to be where we start getting more into decision making. But yeah, I guess feel free to, if you see anyone talking about committees, just throw the questions out there. I'll probably be putting this up on YouTube pretty quickly. It's going to be very fun as a podcast with absolute blackness. And then I also need to make sure that the audio got recorded correctly. And oh dear God, I hope it did, because I didn't take notes. You guys have a nice night. Thank
Oh,
you,
you
thank
too.
for showing up, and thank everyone who already left for also showing up.
Thank you for steering the ship, and you did most of the talking. And I wish I could contribute more, but thank you for keeping things running.
Of course. Well, catch you guys later.
I will see you.